Good morning. It is still morning.
It is still morning.
It is. How's your day going?
Good. Yeah.
Yeah. Good. I was talking to somebody the other day, and we're going to talk a little bit about boundaries today. But I was talking to someone the other day about I don't know how it came up. It was about. Oh, I know what it was. We were talking about what they would share on Facebook. And the conversation actually was more like what they wouldn't share on Facebook, because there's really nothing that this person we were just talking about, everything that flies through their head ends up on Facebook, right?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. You know that kind of person.
Yeah.
Right. And so if that's you, I'm sorry. But and here's what I said. I said, when I was a kid, young men, for the most part, would hold it in, right?
No.
You just kind of didn't. Because I said, if you heard all the crazy ramblings that go through my head, if I verbalized those, you would think I'm a lunatic. I'm serious. Like, all the crazy stuff that goes through my head, you would think I'm a lunatic if I shared it out loud, right? Yeah. Because there's some crazy. All of us. Maybe I'm not. Maybe I am the only one, but I don't think I am, because I see the other stuff that people post. But here's my thought. When I was a kid, for the most part, guys kept it to themselves, but girls had a different tool. Here was their tool. They had a little notebook that they would write down the ramblings and feelings and thoughts in their heads. They would write it down. It had a lock and a key, and they would lock it up and shove it in their sock drawer. And the only thing they had to worry about was maybe their little brother finding it and trying to pry it open or something like that. But we knew that there was a lot of stuff that probably should just be kept here and then kind of put away and maybe hidden for my own consumption, just to go back and say, oh, wow, I was really having a bad day or whatever. But it was for me, for the most part. And I don't know if there was that. I didn't know any guys who kept a diary. It was just kind of a girl thing.
No, a journal. Guys keep a journal.
Yeah, well, I don't really do a good job of keeping a journal either. But what I thought was, it was interesting to me that we have changed so much in the past. I mean, in my lifetime, that there are not a lot of things anymore that surprise me, that shock me when I see people's ramblings on social media.
Yeah.
And so one of the things, generally I want to talk about boundaries today. Boundaries with just maybe with our relationships, with our thoughts, with our technology, maybe even with our government. I don't know. With, the boundaries we should set and shouldn't set, how we dictate what those boundaries look like. And we've had a couple little, previous conversations about this, but I wanted to start with that, like the first boundary that I think about, that I have to really, and biblically it talks about it too, is from between here and here. Well, it used to be the boundary between my head and my tongue, right? Making sure that there's, and walls are something we haven't liked talking about the last 4 years, but it's changing a little bit. But, putting a wall up between my head and my tongue is something that is absolutely critical, especially, biblically. But now it's between here and here. It's saying it, in a way that, do you have any thoughts there? Yeah,
for sure. I think sometimes, you see social media posts and people are posting some very personal reactions or personal thoughts that you're putting out there for the whole world. And you may say okay, well, this is just either my followers or my friends or whatever, but it's not. Anything you put on the internet is forever.
Right.
And I think people have to realize that. But, you have an argument with someone in a store and you go post about it and kind of gripe about it or whatever. I mean, people are going to think, okay, you couldn't manage that in your mind without putting it out there for the whole world to see.
Right.
Why, and I think even in a Christian sense, we have to be careful of the things that we put out there, even with someone we've had an interaction with.
Yeah.
Because, you don't want to be known as the person that's always trying to shove somebody else down, or how you've been offended, or how you've whatever. I think it's important for us to think through, I can manage this, and I don't have to put it out there for the whole world to see. It's not necessary. I can find, if I need to process, I can find one person to process with, and I don't need, a viral sting of people or string of people to affirm me and my feelings.
And I think too, the way I feel right now at this moment is inevitably different than the way I'm going to feel 2 hours, 10 hours, 24 hours from now. And so to think that it's not a good idea to maybe stop and create for yourself a wall that we were talking about a little bit about technology and even instruments or ways to kind of restrain yourself, artificially restrain things in your kids' technology or whatever, that makes it difficult to kind of overcome that barrier for good reason. Because, like, for example, the way I feel now and the words that might come out of my mouth or the text that might come out of my thumbs are very different than what I might feel 2 hours from now or 10 hours. But once it gets out there, if you don't create that boundary, once it gets out there, it's out there to stay, especially if it's on social media.
And we have, in our head, we'll do the self-talk in a way that we won't do in person. If you and I are having an issue or an altercation or whatever, I may process in my head in a way that I'd never speak in person, because it could either hurt the relationship, it could, be, unfruitful, whatever. But people, I think, will text things to someone or write things online before even processing it. And you're destroying relationships with people at times that you've had for years, and you're throwing it out there for everybody to comment on. I mean, I've seen it, and it's horrible.
And you wonder why we do that. And I think one of the reasons why, and if you any kind of psychologist will tell you these days that it's that dopamine fix of having people comment or affirm you. We want this affirmation, and that's not a new thing. That's not a new human condition that we desire affirmation.
Right.
It's just there's new ways of getting it now, and that is the like, the retweet,
more
the
instantaneous.
repost. Yeah, exactly. And those things. And so social media, obviously, it lends itself really well to those kind of bad tendencies we have to remove those boundaries and not,
and I think there's some good, there's some good things about social media that you can post about. I mean, it doesn't have to be, a negative all the time. It can be, posting encouraging scriptures or encouraging words or how to help someone get healthy or whatever. There's a lot of positive uses for those things, but it seems like it's quick to degenerate into something, negative that makes me push someone down in order to lift myself up and feel better about myself. But I don't think you ever feel better. Like when you're publicly putting someone down in a forum, I mean, do you really walk away feeling better?
One of the things and I don't want it to be, I struggle when I've done this recently, but I've unfriended people lately on Facebook because I don't really post a ton on Facebook. I put these podcasts on there, and every once in a while, I do like to stay connected to people that I want to be connected to that have kind of played a part in my personal history. But I just sometimes everything I see from a person tends to be just angst, just kind of creates in me this, I don't know that I really want to read everything that they have to say about that. It's just, and so I just realized, it's probably better just to unfriend that person and not see their comments from now on.
Yeah.
I had a friend, sorry, in quotes, on Facebook that, and back to the boundaries thing, that I would see him go off about. And he never said it explicitly, but he would talk about his wife and the fight they were having about exactly. I see your face. Why you would ever think that's a good idea to air your dirty laundry of some disagreement you're having with your spouse on social media. And I think the reason why is because that affirmation. I want people to say you're right.
Yeah. And
I think, wow, that's somebody that I don't think they're a friend on Facebook anymore. But because it's someone that also would post things about, a successful marriage and things like that. And I'm thinking, okay, well, you're talking out both sides of your mouth.
Yeah.
Because a successful marriage doesn't air my dirty laundry with my wife for everyone to see.
Protecting, I think that's part of the boundary. Is the goal in a marriage relationship is to try to protect. Like, my wife is very gracious and kind that she's not out airing all my faults to everybody else. She actually sees a role of, okay, I'm trying to protect you. I'm trying to help you.
That's a good point.
It's not that we don't have things that we have to work through. I mean, we do, and every couple does. But the way you balance those out of, either getting help or being, having a safe place to kind of share, is different than kind of airing it out for everybody to see and then think, wow, either you're a real jerk for airing this out and putting it publicly, or your wife is horrible. I can't believe you're dealing with that. I mean, what good does either one of those extremes do?
They're both bad. Yeah. And I think one or the other usually of people that do that when they air those kinds of things, I think either they're a real jerk or their spouse is a real jerk.
Yeah.
You think?
Well, and it doesn't have to be social media either. I think just in groups of friends or groups of people, to begin, negative speak about someone that you're either, whether it's a spouse or a friend or whatever, I think there is a responsibility to try to cover that. There's one thing when there is unhealthy boundaries. For instance, if someone is actually bringing harm to somebody in some way, that's unhealthy. Yeah. Obviously, that's something where you may want to communicate to someone else and say, hey, you probably shouldn't be in a sphere with this person because they're in an unhealthy place. I mean, I can see something like that. But to go to a group of people or in a group of people and begin to air out dirty laundry about someone else when they're not there to defend themselves is generally a very, very poor idea. And it actually makes you, the person who's doing it, I think, look worse than the person that they're talking about.
Totally agree. Any objective thinker is probably going to look at that person and say, wow, a couple things. That's really not a very nice thing for them to say about the person that they love.
Yeah.
The second thing is, don't ever share anything with that person.
Right. Good point.
Yeah, because I can't trust that they have any boundary at all when it comes to what they will and will not share. And if I share in confidence anything with them, it's bound to come out.
That's a really good point. I remember, I think it's Stephen Covey who talked about that if I'm coming to you bad-mouthing someone else, what are you going to think when I walk away from you?
Yeah, exactly.
What's he saying about me to someone else? I think you have to be really conscious of that our words can really do harm. The old adage, sticks and stones can break my bones, but names will never hurt me. That's very untrue.
They just hurt in a different way.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah.
And the Bible says the tongue is full of deadly poison. I mean, that's a pretty harsh judgment.
It is. Well, and that's not the only thing it says about the tongue. It's the rudder and steers the ship, and there's leads you to destruction. All kinds of things that are said about the tongue. And so I think, obviously that boundary. And it's funny that the tongue now we could translate it in a modern version of the scripture to the thumbs.
Yeah.
Because it's not necessarily what we speak, and sometimes it's what we text or post. And I understand this is the same thing. But it isn't your tongue a lot of times. It's what we're actually putting in a post or a text or a tweet or whatever. What are your thoughts? And I'm trying to think this through, like the kinds of boundaries as a person, because I was telling you, I had a conversation with my wife recently about, setting boundaries for, in our home, like who we invite in, how open we are. Yeah. And, we always want to be hospitable. But like, what are the boundaries? What about, let me ask you this. What about with our families? I think, like, what about with your spouse? Are there any? Are there things that as a husband, I should be saying, well, the boundaries between like what I do or do not say or do not do in relation to my spouse Are there some things there that we maybe don't do so well, or that we set too many boundaries? I think this is just my kind of gut reaction to that question that I'm asking myself. There is that I think for the most part, I think we probably tend to have too many boundaries between spouses, culturally, and we probably should remove some of those. Thinking that this is my world and this is your world. You have any initial thoughts on that, like, or things that we should absolutely have boundaries between spouses? Okay. I might get in trouble here, but
have a bathroom boundary.
I agree.
Have a bathroom boundary.
Some people do not. By the way.
I know they don't.
And I think it's weird.
I'm like, have a bathroom boundary.
Well, that's the thing is, I mean, I think that's one of the things that, people could verbalize it differently. Like, keep some, when it comes to all the things in our life that are just kind of the base things in my life.
Yeah.
Those are things that I don't necessarily want my wife to think of me like the first thing she thinks of me, like, oh yeah, all those base kind of things that that have to happen in my life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't want my wife to think, he really is a pig.
Right. Well, exactly.
And I think that really actually helps kind of keep a little bit of a spark along the way when there is some basic, like you said, of some of the base things of life. There are some basic boundaries and basic lines of respect there that, particularly, I don't know how much it applies to guys feeling like, I need private space or private whatever. I think, you could talk about a few things, but I think there's more often for ladies needing private space, private, time is important to them and is needful. I think really even when mom has kids and other things, to have some individual time is important. And for a husband to help protect those boundaries for his wife. It's not only that we would have boundaries between one another, husband and wife, but I think that's also part of the husband's responsibility to step in and protect, the boundaries that a wife needs to have for her own ability to, again, I don't want to use the word me time, but at least some time to process her day, process her thoughts, process, whatever, where there's not always activity that she feels like she has to attend to. I also think in marriage, particularly, there are some things that you have to have boundaries with that you build along the way, because you're inevitably going to have times where there's maybe disagreements or arguments or, big challenges that come along. And once you get through those, to like getaways down the road and then like say, oh yeah, but you remember when this happened or when you did this or when, whatever, I did this for you. At some point you got to set a boundary to say, okay, I'm not going back there. We're going to move forward. Yeah. For my wife and I,
that's a good point.
Frankly, one of the boundaries that we set, we never mention divorce. We just don't. It's a word that we don't talk about, no matter how much our
I like that
conversation might get heated. Yeah. We have a boundary that it's not a word that we're going to utter. It's not, as far as we're concerned, we don't consider that a possibility.
Yeah, that's not part of our reality.
Yeah.
Our marriage. Yeah. Yeah.
So you have to set some boundaries. And I think, again, when you have young relationships and other things, both you're maturing in both your relationship, you're maturing in both your person. There's bound to be hiccups along the way. And if you keep reaching back to those, I've known couples that have reached back to early in marriage and have gone 30, 40 years and are still bitter about early marriage things because they can't let it go.
Yeah.
So setting some boundaries of things that have happened that if particularly for believers, that you've genuinely forgiven, you've genuinely forgotten, you've genuinely, or maybe not even forgotten, but you've generally tried to move on from. Yeah. Setting a boundary, saying, I'm not pulling that back up into our current conversation.
It's interesting, too, that that expression in the marriage vows that I think you use. I think I heard it. I heard you use it when you married Benjamin and Liz. Is the forsaking all others.
Yeah.
That's another thing I think that's important to just kind of let sleeping dogs lie.
Yeah.
Is in marriage between spouses not mentioning previous relationships.
Yeah.
And that's not. I mean, people think that's maybe a little naive. I don't think it's naive. I think it's again guarding. It's saying, okay, listen, I would never mention a previous relationship because that is something that is now I've forsaken all others, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know if those two really go hand in hand, the forsaking all others line and previous, but I think they do. Is I'm committed to you alone, which means if I had a previous relationship, that it's not kind of null and void now.
Yeah.
But I think I've actually heard, and I'll tell you this, I think I've heard it in relationships that I've seen fail. I've heard them bring up previous relationships.
Yeah.
And it rarely is productive or fruitful.
Nicole and I were raised somewhat differently, and she never dated growing up. I was the first person that she ever had a dating relationship with, first person she ever kissed. She never went to proms or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
You can talk about all those boundaries or whatever, but I did all those things.
Right.
I had relationships in high school and went to Christmas dances and proms and all that, and I had all these pictures. So when we got married, I had a box of pictures and other things, and the Lord just convicted me of it. And I just thought I need to get rid of all of that because one, I didn't want my kids rummaging through it and saying, "Oh, who's this? Who's that? Who's this? Who's that?" And I wanted to keep my focus on where it is with my wife and have a boundary that I'm not going back into. And again, these weren't necessarily even like serious relationships or anything like that.
Yeah.
But it was just reminders of at least a relationship with someone that I didn't feel like was honoring to Nicole.
Yeah.
And so I felt, okay, I need to set a boundary there to get rid of that and just.
I would agree with you. Yeah. And it's funny because I think it may have been something unspoken that my mom probably got rid of. I don't think you could dig through my mom's old photos and find pictures of us, like me with like a high school girlfriend.
Yeah.
They're probably gone if there ever were any, because again, she wouldn't want, that to even be something that my kids would say, "Oh, well, who is that?"
Yeah.
Like the only person my kids have ever seen me with is their mother.
Yeah.
Which is appropriate. I think it's right. Not that they don't understand. I mean, they understand that I was young once and I maybe dated, at one time, but I think it's a good boundary. I think it's a good one. I don't think it's naive. I think it's healthy is what I think. I think sometimes we just need to leave things behind. And again, I agree with you, that time marker. Like sometimes we just need to, okay, that's done.
Yeah.
Leave that behind.
I've tried to be transparent with my kids and letting them know, hey, your mother was perfect. I wasn't perfect.
That sounds about right. Yeah.
But I also think it's something it's different in verbalizing, hey, I just like what I'm sharing now,
Then they think you ruined her, by the way. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
I said they think you ruined her. Yeah. Because if she was perfect and they see her
yeah,
now,
right.
Okay. Sorry. Go ahead.
But I think it's something different about seeing an image versus a conversation.
For sure.
So
absolutely.
That's why I think it's important to kind of probably get rid of those token things that are visual reminders of things that aren't healthy.
And I think maybe people just don't know that that's a good idea. Because I've heard people just ignorantly bring things up before, and I can tell. I've actually seen it before cause discomfort in their spouse, or and like they're bringing something up from their past, and you're thinking, okay, that's something you should know better.
Yeah,
you should know that's something you need to just leave behind.
Yeah,
yeah.
So I think also thinking about boundaries in terms of friendships.
Yeah.
I know some who listen are younger who aren't married yet, certainly thinking in that direction. But I mean, what thoughts would you have there in terms of just interpersonal relationships of young people, groups of young people? What are appropriate boundaries?
It's funny what comes to mind. It's interesting to me. I don't know why this came to mind, but I would say when you get to know your friends really well, and I'm hesitant to actually bring it up, but I would say if you know a friend, if you know you have a friend that has a same-sex attraction, and that's something they struggle with, then you need to be really clear. And I maybe didn't see that coming, but for some reason that sticks out to me. That if you know a friend that has the same-sex attraction, and you think, I probably should make sure that I'm never doing. I mean, and first of all, dealing with that is one thing. You know, biblically, obviously, we know that that's something that acted upon is sin. But I think those kind of boundaries, I think young ladies have more of an issue with this, because young ladies are usually very, very just open and in a way that young men typically are not. And so, but I think it's something we really need to be careful about. I really need to understand that there are ways in which I can help a friend, and there are ways in which maybe someone else that's not their peer needs to help them.
Yeah.
Does that make? I know you probably didn't see me coming with that one, but I just think it's something that is because here's the thing. The reason why too is because I think it's more and more common these days to have the encouragement of same-sex attraction being acted upon. That's what's more common. I think people say, "Oh, it's fine. It's who you are. It's who you are." No. And so I think we need to be, first of all, be aware that happens. That those tendencies and those things, they happen all around us. It happens. Those. I'm trying to, and you can tell I'm trying to make sure that I navigate this in a way that's not considered heartless and mean, and I'm not trying to be. I'm just saying you really need to understand, as a friend, there are certain things you can help a friend with, and certain things you probably should involve other people with. Help me here, save me from this one, or maybe just change the subject altogether. I don't know.
Well, my first thought there is, in a lot of things, you know, when you're a young person, people you're friends with, you want to help. You know, you see them going through something, you want to help.
Yeah,
and I think that can be good. It can be good.
Sure.
It can be a really positive thing, but I think the best opportunity in Scripture that we could have to kind of, particularly when it's any of the type of maybe sinful behavior or identity issues, things that would require, things that call for kind of lifelong, that can create lifelong challenges.
Yeah.
You know,
agreed. Yeah.
I think Titus 2 probably speaks most clearly to how to handle those things, which is older women to younger women, older men to younger men, and not necessarily peer to peer. I think
creates challenges, I think, when you're peers with somebody, how much you can speak.
It comes out first to peers. You know, I think particularly when there's identity issues, normally the first person that's going to find out is friends.
Yeah, for sure.
They're either going to already suspect it, they're going to outright question it, you know, say, "Hey, are you dealing with this? Because I'll see something."
Right.
Or there'll be a moment of just kind of wanting to bare your soul to someone and kind of saying, "Hey, you know, this is what I'm feeling." And so I think there is this initial probably interaction with a peer group. But I think if you're on the receiving end, you know, and I don't know about you, but I mean, as a young man, I had a friend who was a good friend, and never in a million years, you know, suspected.
Yeah, me too.
Anything.
By the way. Yep.
You know, he's a farmer kid, everything, and went off to college and was kind of affirmed in that. And what's interesting is the change in even like mannerisms and other things that came once that lifestyle was really embraced. And so I had to make a break from that friendship. We had been friends since I think like sixth grade, and a whole group of us were friends. And I found this out kind of after I was married, that he had kind of gone in this direction. And, I felt like I had to make a break in the friendship, that I couldn't be affirming.
Yeah.
It's not that I didn't care.
Sure.
I did care, but I couldn't be affirming to the direction, because he grew up in church too, not
Yeah.
the church that I grew up in, but he grew up in church, good family. But I will say, what most often is behind these things is some sort of trauma somewhere. There's trauma in the past, and there's kind of dynamic issues in the family of origin and the system that create this. And so you want to be sympathetic. I want to be very sympathetic. But I think if you're in the peer group, you have to point to, I think, older people who can step in
Agreed.
and offer better help. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to shun, but it does mean that you're not the one to try to solve the problem that is going on. And you got to be cautious.
I would say that also applies to other things that are kind of these big issues, like depression leading to suicidal tendencies.
Yes.
Those are the things you don't want to think that as a friend, I can address with you directly, and I can be the end all, and I can help you through this. That's not necessarily the best course, is just to think, I'm going to help you through this. This is something that may require a lot more intervention than a friend or a peer could offer. In
professional counseling, there's a requirement, everything is confidential except certain things, and there's a duty to inform,
self-harm.
And so you kind of have to be proactive. And I think you can kind of take that matrix in some ways and lay it over friendships that, you can have a confidential relationship with a friend, but there's probably some things that pop up that, even if they share it with you and say, don't share it with anybody, whether it's depression, I'm thinking of harming myself, I'm thinking of doing this, that, or the other, or I'm feeling this way about my identity or other things. That is a duty to inform someone to get help, because it is a road to destruction. Now, our society doesn't see all that as a road to destruction, but for a believer, it is a road to destruction. For someone who is maybe been part of your friend group in church, or part of a relationship that you've had. That's hard. That is really, I can't, and the circumstance that I had, I had already kind of grown apart anyway, just because I lived 12 hours away and we weren't close friends anymore. But when you have close friend relationships that begin to change the dynamic pretty quickly, that could be difficult on both sides of the relationship. Yeah. So, again, I don't want to dominate the discussion here, but it's good. I think
you're helping rescue me from my.
I wasn't quite expecting that, but it's good.
No, I know you weren't.
But I think setting the boundary with friends to say, okay, if you're in the struggle zone where you're wrestling, let's get help. Listen to older people in your life who are trying to influence you, who have more experience than you. I don't want to be the one necessarily that you're leaning on for counsel and advice. I'll be praying for you. I'll be a friend in the ways that I can be a friend. But I think once that person makes a leap in the outright, in my opinion, outright sin, then I think the dynamic changes quite a bit.
Yeah,
I think there needs to be boundaries that say, I can't go with you there.
Right, exactly.
I can't go with you.
Yeah, and I that's where I was getting to that and getting at that. And I know it's this sensitive kind of field to navigate. It's kind of a minefield, but I don't think it's a minefield that we need to just avoid and stay out of. I think it's something that we absolutely, especially with young people, with my children, with young people, you need to say, listen, there are certain things we're going to talk about here, and this is a hot button is one way to put it, but these are issues that are difficult to deal with. These are not things that are like, oh yeah, well, the Bible says this. I get it. The Bible does say this, by the way, but that doesn't change the fact that there's a lot of emotion and turmoil and very, very deep feelings associated with these kinds of issues.
Well, yeah, and it again, whether it is depression, whether it's self-harm, whether it's I'm trying to think of the various other things we've talked about.
Same-sex attraction.
Same-sex attraction. Other things along those lines. All of that stems from pain somewhere.
Yeah.
It's not the normative course of development. And so there needs to be compassion. I think the Lord would have compassion.
Yeah, for sure.
I don't think the Lord is never affirming of sin. He's clear on sin, but he has compassion on those who have been subject to trauma or pain or other things that they have come upon a mechanism of protecting themselves that is unhealthy.
Yeah.
That's really what these are.
Yeah.
They're places of an unhealthy way of protecting ourselves. You've probably seen it before, but I had never seen Sound of Freedom, and I just saw it last night.
It's a painful. It's a
my
very,
goodness.
very difficult movie to watch.
Yeah, I mean, just
True
very,
story.
very difficult.
Yeah.
And
especially as a father of a daughter.
What I think about what I was thinking about as I was watching that, and if you know the story, it focuses on particularly two children.
Yeah.
The son is like 8, I think, and gets brought back first, and then the daughter takes a while longer. But
trafficking of children is what
the
the subject matter. Yeah.
As soon as the son gets brought back, what kind of is beginning to wrestle in my mind is what trauma is he going to deal with for the rest of his life?
Yeah.
And then the daughter as well, what trauma is she going to deal with for the rest of his life? And as you see the faces of these kids and other things, and I think as a culture, maybe more when we were growing up, it was kind of like, oh, get over it. And there was some societal pressure. I think there was societal pressure in some ways that kind of sort of guided in a direction, even if it wasn't completely healthy. I just know, it was pretty taboo when we were growing up to have same-sex attraction or even talk about depression or talk about self-harm or any of those things. Whereas in culture today, those things are not taboo at all. You hear people talk about, I mean, it's everywhere. And so there's no societal pressure that sort of kind of keeps things at least at least somewhere on the tracks.
Yeah.
And so there's this, I think, desire to, again, kind of heal yourself or protect yourself or whatever. And it's unhealthy. And I would also say, from my perspective as a pastor, as one who reads the Word, I think there's a lot of demonic influence. I'm not saying that it's necessarily possession, but I do think there's a lot of demonic influences that presses people into relationships, into unhealthy habits, into unhealthy behaviors because it is a spiritual battle.
Yeah.
And think, particularly with regards to transgenderism, same-sex attraction, other things, there is no procreation in those means. There's no way in any of that realm that there is a gift of children.
You said demonic influence, and I was going to say, if you think about the first commandment that God gave, it was be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, and have dominion over it, right? Dominion over creation. And so that was the command that God gave, Adam and then Adam and Eve. And so, I think that any attack on that, a direct attack on be fruitful, fill the earth, have dominion over it, is obviously anti-God, right? And so I think a lot of these things that we see that it seem to be, wow, they really kind of, it seems to target that whole be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and have dominion over it.
And it elevates our sexuality to godlike status.
Yeah.
versus keeping God in his place and submitting our sexuality to the lordship of Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
So there's a distinct, I know this is probably way away from boundaries, and maybe
Well, I'll say the one boundary too, I was going to say,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know that we want to tackle this today, but what do I do if I'm dealing with that?
yeah,
What boundaries do I set if I'm dealing with same-sex attraction, by the way, or if I'm really dealing with this tendency towards depression, even suicidal tendencies? What boundaries do I set? Maybe, and we can talk about that another time. But I don't think we're totally off course. But yeah, go ahead.
I think we have to submit, all things to the lordship of Christ. All things must be submitted. Our desires, our wants, our perception of who we are, even in marriage. Even in marriage. Our again, I want to keep a PG program, but our intimacy with our spouses and other things, this all has to be submitted to the lordship of Christ. It's not simply about our desires being met, our personal gratification or other things. This is, all of these things are created by God in their purest sense to bring glory to him and to result in praise and worship to him. And so our culture comes in and tries to pervert all of these things in a way which it's made about us.
Yeah.
And we become the gods, and his commands become lesser than our feelings. I feel this way. I feel like I'm attracted. I feel depressed. And again, I think there's a lot that plays into all of these things. It's not simply my own self-perception. Depression can be related to medical issues, chemical imbalances, food issues. There's a gamut of things that those can be related to, which is why, way back to the original thought here, is it's probably not the best place for me as or if I am a 20, 21-year-old giving advice to my 20 or 21-year-old friend.
Yeah.
Other than saying, what?
My depth of experience and knowledge is very shallow.
Yeah. I think saying, I want you to know I care.
Yeah.
I believe the Lord cares. I want to be praying for you. I'm probably not the best to help you walk this journey, but I'm happy to help connect you with someone who maybe can help you.
Yeah.
I think that's probably a better approach. And then you kind of have to let that person make the decision and trust that they're going to make the decision. That's a boundary too.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm saying, hey, John, I want you to meet with Tobey. And I think he'll be able to help you walk through this. I can't help you. I don't feel like I have the skill or the experience to help you. I want you to meet with him. I'll contact him and connect you both. So what I've done is I've set a boundary. Now, John has to make a choice. Is he going to connect with you or not?
Right.
No, if he doesn't, I think it's best that I maintain that boundary because God may be leading John down a path. Paul said, we don't like to think about this, but Paul said there was some I turned over to Satan that they might come back, that they might return to the kingdom at some point. That they would see the path that's leading is destructive and if I keep going in and trying to rescue, then that's not the boundaries that God would have me set.
Yeah. And it can be unhealthy for the person that's trying to, be that rescuer as well.
Yeah.
Okay. So change course a little bit. You said it's about friendships. And this is one of the things that I thought of when you said friendships. As a married man, there are two women in my life. Well, now that as a married man with children, it's a little different. But two women in my life prior to me having children that I'm very close to, really close to. My mother is the first, and I'm supposed to kind of learn to kind of distance that relationship a little bit when I'm married and now my spouse becomes primary. And my spouse, my wife is the other one, the other woman in my life that I am close to, that I'm intimate with, that I share intimate thoughts, that I share my feelings, and sure there are guys that I can sit down with and have relationships with and ride motorcycles with and even have deep friendships and deep conversations with. But here's what I would say is a boundary that a lot of, I don't know how common it is, but I've seen it be a real entanglement for people, is to think that as a married man or woman, I can have very, very close friendships with the opposite sex.
Yeah. No.
Yeah, you're pretty quick to say no, and people would say, but wait, but well, and they would say that. They would say, oh, but this and but that, and you think, okay, listen, I'm telling you, this is just the way it works.
Yeah.
And you can tell me that 2 + 2 = 5, and I will say to you, that's a different kind of math.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
I know you have thoughts about that, and I'm pretty sure you agree with me. But
well, I've had people come, new single ladies come to church, and I don't think they mean anything by it at all. But I've had emails that would say, "Could we meet up for lunch?" or something like that. And again, I'm not suggesting that they were.
Right.
Anything like that. But it was just a boundary that I can't cross. I'm not going to be seen in a restaurant with another woman who's not my wife.
Right.
I'll take my wife and we'll go together and have lunch with you.
Yeah.
And I don't think the at least I didn't get the impression that they were hinting at anything else. I just think they were probably in a professional field where that was just normal for some reason, I even think, whether you're serving in the church or not, I just think it's an unhealthy type of relationship to have where you're having, personal conversations with people who are not your spouse.
And it's the way we're wired, by the way. People say, well, it's just, that you're just not thinking like objectively, and you just can't. No, we're wired in a way that men and women are just wired that way. And so that's something that, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I just think people don't, you discount how we were created, men and women, to think that I can be very close. And I know you're talking about something different. You're talking about not even fostering, like not even being alone together with the opposite sex. And I would agree with you, by the way. But to think that I could foster a friendship with someone else, a very close friendship with an individual that's of the opposite sex when I'm a married man. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, at church, we're very relational, that, and I have no problem, in a crowd, giving a hug. I mean, I'm careful how it happens and all that sort of thing. I don't mind, meeting with a lady in terms of like a church thing, but I make sure it's public. If it's at the church, I make sure someone else is there. There's just certain things that you do to guard. Thankfully we have security cameras. I make sure I'm sitting in front, most of the time in a security camera if I'm not in the room with other people with me.
Right.
So there's things like that I just think are important. But to your point about building a relationship with someone of the opposite sex, I think you have to be really careful. You just have to be really careful, because if you have a couple A and couple B and your friends doing stuff together, and husband A and wife B have communication with one another that's kind of open and free, and couple B starts to have problems, and you start to get advice from, someone else, you can easily walk down a path of thinking, oh, he understands me, she understands me, and it leads down a very unhealthy journey. That's just not how, I don't think it's how the Lord intended us to interact.
Yeah.
Which is why I think Scripture talks about older men to younger men, older women to younger women. So even at my age, I need someone older to be able to communicate with and talk with about things that are going on. I don't need to go to someone of the opposite sex. I don't even know that I need to go air it out to my direct peer group. I mean, I guess you can at times, but it's something nice about having someone who's got experience.
Yeah.
That if you're willing to humble yourself and listen, to hear that experience and then to put it to practice.
And people will call us old fuddy-duddies, if that's still a word.
Are we?
Well, sure. I'm okay with that. I'm seriously, I've gotten to the point where I'm not as concerned about what people think about my thoughts.
No.
My opinions about things. And I think my opinions are based contextually on, for the most part, on Scripture. And so I'm okay with that. I've gotten to the point where a lot of people don't like the way I think or the things I say, that I guess I've gotten used to it. And maybe it's calluses, that have built on me. And I'm like, okay, people don't like what I say or what I think. That's okay. I'm okay with that. I'm fine. And people say, well, I can be, you're just over sexualizing it, or you're doing, you think that you can't have a healthy relationship with a person of the opposite sex. I have a very healthy relationship with a person of the opposite sex. She is my wife.
Yeah.
And so I think what it does too, I think, if we're not careful, is if we think we can foster those kinds of relationships with somebody else of the opposite sex, it steals from the intimacy with your spouse. And you've seen it. I've seen it. I've seen it in couples. I've seen it in family. I've seen it tear families apart. So when someone says, if someone would say that I'm an old fuddy-duddy, and that's old-fashioned kind of thinking, I would say I'm okay with that because I've seen the damage it can do.
It definitely steals from your spouse. It's not just, I would push it farther to say it's not just the physical acts of intimacy that you have to be cautious of. It's the emotional side of that too. I can be emotionally tied up with someone. And I think we'd all be surprised at the number of people that have online relationships that are extremely unhealthy.
Okay, online, talk about boundaries.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that dovetails really well with that. And that's a lot of times where that happens. It's not necessarily friendships in the workplace or anything. Now it's a lot of times friendships online with Facebook friends or people that you're connected with online that you really have to be cautious of.
If you're in a relationship with somebody and you've never met them and they're asking you for money,
there's a great boundary.
They probably don't love you.
That's a boundary that, money. Oof. That could be a whole show. Money and what do we do with when family asks for money? Or kids, or what? Well, good grief. That is maybe even a different topic. One thing I was gonna, I think that's a whole different show. In all honesty, a whole different episode. One thing, and I mentioned it to you, and I think it's a lot of people struggle with this. Well, maybe they don't. I mean, hospitality is great. I think it's great to open our homes and have people in. But then I think it's important when we do that. First of all, I don't think it's important. I think it's critical that we open our homes and invite people in and are hospitable to friends and neighbors. But when we do, there are obviously boundaries that we should set when we do that. And I think maybe some of these might be obvious, but, people should respect your lifestyle and your convictions when they enter your home. Oh. And I don't think it's wrong to say, hey, listen, and I haven't had this problem, thank goodness, because the people that I've invited into my home have always been respectful and understand where I'm coming. But if someone's cursing or someone's doing things that are way outside of your norm and your normal convictions and lifestyle, I think those are things that you should be very explicit about setting boundaries with.
I agree.
Yeah. I told you it's interesting. And so this is a really good, this is kind of a good, maybe a template, but at least an example of how we set boundaries recently, and they just naturally now are part of our routine. And so we have young adults in our home every Sunday night. And when we do, it changes from a meal to a Bible study and then just hanging out afterwards. And the truth is 18, 19, 20, 21, 22-year-olds are very different at 9, 10, 11 o'clock at night than I am. At
Yeah.
11 o'clock at night, I'm asleep.
Yeah.
At 10 o'clock at night, I'm usually asleep. I change it a little bit on those evenings, but so I'm not in the same place as there. So they naturally, months and months ago when we started, they naturally would say they would just stay. Didn't feel late to them at 10 o'clock at night.
No.
And when that happened a time or two up until 10:30 or maybe later, one time I said, okay, guys, we're going to wrap it up at 10 o'clock. And my famous expression, I didn't coin it, but it's, you don't have to go home. You just can't stay here.
Yeah.
And so that was me saying, okay, listen, 10 o'clock is the line at which I need a little peace and quiet because I need to gear down and go to bed, and my whole family as well. But the nice thing is, and this is the neat thing, is that then it became just, they understand. And these kids that don't wind down at 10 o'clock, they do understand, though, in my home. Now, at 10 o'clock, they're at the door and they're like, okay, see ya, we're heading out.
Yeah.
And they may be heading out to go hang out somewhere. I don't know. But they understood because I said to them one time, hey, listen, guys, we're going to do this. And I think sometimes if we're not careful, we think that's rude. We think that's rude to set boundaries in our home. Hey, here's one that I learned from someone a long time ago. And it wasn't something that I typically did, and I think we need to understand this when we visit somebody else's home, is they asked me to take my shoes off. Or look at people's feet when you walk in their house.
Yeah.
Look at their feet when you walk in their house.
Yeah.
If they don't have shoes on, take your shoes off at the door, right?
Yep.
And I think it's okay to ask someone, hey, do you mind taking your shoes off at the door? I don't know. In your home, are there certain, like with hospitality, certain boundaries that you think that
we're pretty open.
We do well or don't do well?
Yeah, we're pretty open in our home. We have a lot of people generally in and out, and we've most of the time had people respect just general boundaries in the home. Sometimes it's hard to help people know. Our situation's a little different in that we've got a bunch of kids, and so particularly earlier on, getting the kids in bed was a big deal, and sometimes particularly people who either don't have kids or kids are out of the home or whatever don't quite grasp, oh, okay, you got some work to do after we leave to get everybody ready for bed. We don't have that as much anymore as what we used to have. But I generally think unless you're, unless it's a New Year's Eve party, being there at midnight or 1 o'clock is probably unhealthy. It's not good.
Yeah.
Someone invites you over for dinner, 2-3 hours, unless they say, hey, can you stay and play a game? Can we stay and talk more? If your host is inviting you to stay, I think that's something different.
So I think maybe the boundaries we need to be more cognizant of are the boundaries of the visiting. Like if I'm visiting someone's home, maybe I need to set for myself some things or some expectations of, okay, I need to know that as it gets late in the evening, I need to be thinking, okay, don't just roll straight past the graciousness of my host.
Yeah. Particularly if it's like, for instance, like a Sunday night. Most people have to get up and go to work in the morning.
Yeah.
So you want to be aware of that and kind of be respectful of people's boundaries. I also think it's okay for the host to say, hey guys, we're going to have to start getting the kids to bed. Or even, if you're a church group, one of the easy ways to kind of begin to conclude things is to say, hey guys, let's gather for a word of prayer.
That's right. Oh, because that's kind of built into our wiring as people who've been in church.
At the end.
We're wrapping it up. Wrapping it up. I was going to say, and I've lost my train of thought there, but kind of thinking about hospitality, and I totally lost it. And I completely on another page now because the prayer thing, I think it was we do a lot with prayer. That's we pray before we eat and we pray at the end of the day.
But I think Jesus was generally very open.
I got my train of thought though.
Yeah.
Back, sorry. Ephesians 5.
He's very open with his time.
Yeah.
And we should strive for that. But I think setting healthy boundaries is good.
This is one of those things of getting older, unfortunately. The train derails and my thought goes over there.
You got so much good information up there.
I was thinking the other day, so not just when you're in somebody else's home, but around somebody else. I was reading Ephesians 5 the other day, and it was talking about the boundaries we should place for ourselves, not to make sure that our liberties don't infringe on somebody else's convictions.
Oh yeah.
Right? It was Ephesians 5. I don't know if it was. I'm trying to think of it. It was eating meat. I think it was. Yeah, I can't remember if it was or not. But anyway, if I'm eating meat and I don't care if it was sacrificed to idol gods or whatever, Paul's talking to the church and he's saying, hey, make sure your liberty, you can have liberty to do certain things. Make sure that does not become a stumbling block to somebody else.
Right.
And so I think that's one of the boundaries we need to place in our own lives with friends and family is to say, listen, there are certain things that I need to be careful that I don't just exercise all my liberties in front of you if it's going to be a problem for you. And I think we talked about this on a previous thing, but there's a lot of things that we really need to be cautious of. I need to be respectful of somebody else's walk, of somebody else's burdens, of somebody else's tendencies. And so I need to really be thinking, okay, those are things I can't say. Those are things I shouldn't be doing or acting that way in front of that person because that might be a real stumbling block for them.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think particularly what pops into my mind is like if you're inviting people over and, you're comfortable with alcohol, but they're not.
Yeah.
And to have it out or to say,
Right.
I'm going to drink, I'll have a glass here while you're having your water or whatever. I just think that's poor hospitality.
Yeah, I would agree.
Very poor hospitality. You can say, well, it's my house. I'm invited. I'm going to do what I want. But that, again, sets you up as the central theme of the night instead of Christ. What did Christ say? He said, we're going to lay down our desires in order to accommodate our brother and our sister. And so I do think we have to be cautious about yes, we have liberty, but exercising that liberty in a way which is unhealthy for others can be a real stumbling block, whether they have a problem with alcohol or simply feel like that it's sinful. I mean, there are those who feel like that.
Yeah.
But that's kind of the one that pops in my mind first along in that discussion.
And to put a bow on that and to kind of actually wrap up our discussion, is I think to think of others more highly than ourselves, like to place others above me that's a good one for me, and it helps me know where to place those kind of off limits signs, those walls and fences, and say, hey, listen, I'm gonna consider somebody else more than I consider myself, or higher than I consider myself. Yeah. So, thanks. Good conversation.
Wow.
I hope it was enlightening or fruitful. It was good for me. Thanks.
Good. Thank you.